I am Rear Admiral Md Khurshed Alam, retired, Secretary, Maritime Affairs Unit, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Bangladesh, Dhaka. Simply speaking, United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, it has come as a constitution of the oceans. This law has created division to allow coastal countries rights either on the living resources or on the non-living resources, depending on the distance from the coastline or baseline. So that's one beauty of this law. In the last 40 years of its existence, it has achieved quite a lot in compared to the other United Nations conventions, either on the biodiversity, on the pollution and other measures. Because this law, as I have said, has given protection to the coastal countries' rights to a certain extent, also a certain limitation. But not only that, it has also ensured the one very important aspect of trade and commerce and fishing. And this was not there before. In the high seas, you can say the trade and commerce is, of course, anybody and every country can carry out. Today, in the whole world, there is about 10 or 11.5 billion deadweight tonnage of cargo is being carried by 150,000 ships from one country to another. So without this, unhindered trade and commerce, every country would have been in difficulty. Like as you see, even in some of the very developed countries, you have this problem of the global supply chain system. Goods are not coming because the ships were not loaded with the appropriate goods from the country it is supposed to come, or from the country it is supposed to be exported and then brought in here. So the trade and commerce with the rights of the law, that unhindered trade and commerce in the sea has become the norm of the day. And not only that, you see the fishery resources, we used to think that it is, sea is very vast and there are enough living resources which will not be exhausted. But by now, by the last 40 years, because of this regulation, we know that sea does not contain the resources which are unlimited. That means there are limited resources, especially living one. So that means if the living one resource is limited, you have to probably consider that how much you can exploit it. There has to be a limit, there has to be some conservation measures. So frankly speaking, this law of the sea has given the conservation of the living resources the high priority, and that has entailed that countries of any areas of any seas, coastal countries or even the landlocked countries cannot simply come and exploit the resources within 200 miles or even beyond 200 miles in the high seas. You see, there are always check and balances for this. And also in the last 40 years, you see there are about 400 maritime boundaries need to be settled. That means there are overlapping claims between the opposite states or between the adjacent states. So out of these 400 maritime boundaries, at least more or less close to half have already been settled based on the formula enunciated by this law of the sea, either on the equitable criteria or on the equidistance criteria, and depending on whether you are face-to-face state or side-by-side adjacent states. And both International Court of Justice and the court created by this law, International Tribunal for Law of the Sea, situated in Hamburg, has taken a number of cases on these maritime boundary issues. Not only that, there was also a number of cases on the fishing, fishing boats going to somebody else's area, catching the fish unauthorizedly. That has been reported, and the case, they have also dealt with those cases. Then there were pollution cases which has also come to the court. So that means pollution is becoming a major issue in the future, and that has been a big chapter on the protection of marine environment in the law itself. And that is the first time you see a consolidated, set of laws which are enunciated in this law of the sea in that very chapter, spreading so many articles. And that tells you that pollution coming from the land sources, pollution coming from the atmosphere, pollution coming from the vessels. You talk about anything, including, of course, the microplastic is also become a big issue. So that is also being taken care of by this law. Frankly speaking, yes, once you allow, the resources or to be taken out from the seabed or the water column by the coastal countries, whatever resources, whenever there is a scramble for resources, challenges comes into play. And one of the very important challenges of the law of the sea in the future days will be how to minimize the pollution of the sea area. That will remain, as I said, one of the very big challenges, because there are regulations also by another competent international organization called IMO, International Maritime Organization, which is based in London, its headquarters, and over 170 countries are also members, just like us, 167 countries. So the challenge would be to minimize the marine effect of pollution of marine environment, not only from the traditional pollutants, but also from the microplastic, which is, you can say, in the million tons of microplastic almost going to the sea. So if that be the case, and if that continues, unfortunately by 2050, when the population will increase more, the pollution will increase more. You might go to sea and find no fish, but the polythene bags, plastic bags, and that's a very difficult problem. On our part, Bangladesh, as you know, that we were the first country in the world to ban manufacture and use of single-use plastic in 2002, and that is in the UNEP website, is already there, But we need to do more for the marine plastics and other things. So that would be one more challenge. Another challenge is coming on the climate change, acidification, then temperature rise. That would be also a big challenge, because on the climate change, not much actually dealt directly by the law of the sea. So what is going to happen? People would try to take advantage of this situation, and climate change, many of the countries, coastal, small island, developing states, everybody is affected. So there we need to probably draw in the best of the experts to say, look, if there is an effect of the climate change, what happens to our EZ, to our baseline? And all these questions would need to be addressed in the days to come, and probably given it a lot of publicity, so that coastal countries knows what happens, like say Maldives, if it goes down altogether. Does the state remains above the water? Because if you don't say anything, where it's 200-mile limit, who takes the sort of resources, whether it is living or non-living resources. And this is going to also come back in a very big way in the days to come. Another challenge is still in the law of the sea. Some of the very important countries have not been party so far. So that will remain a challenge, because say once you are trying to set the boundary of the area, you need to set the boundary of the continental shelf. And for that you need to submit your claim to the CLCS, which is another body which is created by the law of the sea, Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf. So if you are not a party, you can't submit your claim to the CLCS. That means from your coastline, nobody would know from where the area starts, because once the boundary of the continental shelf is settled, then only area will start from then on. and then this is the area and you have to solve. So this is also remain a challenge for the future legal expert to see how this could be resolved with the non-parties, who are not showing any interest to come back in it. And then another challenge would be the acidification. The lot of areas acidification for variety of reasons, like in the land itself we use lot of fertilizer, and this fertilizer is not all consumed by the plants for which we give them. So some of the additional fertilizer actually they find their way to the sea, and when they come to sea, the marine algae, they actually feed on to this fertilizer and their number increases, and when their number increases they need more oxygen, so they take on the oxygen. So when they take off this oxygen from the water, there is acidification, no fish, other plants can live in. So this is also going to be probably a big challenge for the future to come. And finally, I would see that marine alien species which are traveling through at the sea, ship's bottom, like say Mediterranean has different types of species in the sea itself because of the salinity, because of its pH factor and other factor. Now a ship stays 1 month in Mediterranean, then this species get stuck into the, and then if it travels to the say Bay of Bengal and it stays there for a month, some of it gets disentangled from the ship's bottom and then get to the water areas, So this movement of alien species also already causing a lot of problem, and this might continue, and really the law of the sea sometime may be helpless to see how this can be addressed, And the ocean warming, another very important area. If ocean warming continues to happen the way it is happening, because ocean is absorbing a lot of carbon dioxide, and it is a sink for carbon dioxide, it's a reservoir for carbon dioxide. But if it continues in the same way and the temperature goes to 2 degrees plus or so, then, the most of the living resources will have to run for their life, They will not stay in the areas where the ocean warming is taking place. So if they move to the cooler regions, you look at the condition of our law, So we will be facing this migration not only for the people, this migration of the living resources from an area to other seas, to the cooler waters, to the polar regions, would also create a big challenge for the law of the sea to be dealt with in the future time.